Hey, this is Pastor Mark. Welcome to this episode of the Fultondale First podcast. On today's episode, I sit down with Fultondale First member David Dykes. David has had a journey of grief the last few years, and he sits down and shares that journey with us and what God has taught him through that journey. And I know it's going to be an encouragement to you today.
Welcome to the Fultondale First podcast. Our mission at Fultondale First is to love God, love people, and make disciples. And this podcast is aimed to help you join that mission. Thanks for joining us for this episode.
Welcome to this episode of the Fultondale First podcast. I'm excited about this one because I'm here with my friend and fellow member of Fultondale First Baptist, David Dykes. And man, he's got a story, and we're gonna talk about that story a little bit. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Man, it's good to have you. So I'm gonna let David tell you a little bit about himself first. So you've been here a few years,
Right.
and I was trying to think of how long, and I don't even know, like 6 or 7 years. But I'm gonna let you tell that story. Tell the story of
All
how
right.
you got to Fultondale First, and really just your story in general.
All right. Well, in fact, I think we actually joined. The first time I actually came here was about right after you came here.
Yep.
It was within a couple of weeks. We were actually visited. My father was a minister of music in Sylacauga, so I was a member of the church for 50 years,
Yeah.
40, 50 years of one church. So we looked around trying to find a good church. Well, we were going to church elsewhere in Fultondale. Just woke up one morning, had no gas. We were going to a church in Mount Olive, and I said, well, there's a church right up the hill. Let's see if we can. And came that first Sunday, and the rest is history. We've been here about 6 or 7 years now. And
6.5, I guess, because 7 years for me will be in June.
Right.
Yeah.
So it was it's a God thing for sure, because the whole time we had actually been to this church before y'all had came here, and a couple of times. This was right after, probably about a year after the tornadoes had hit.
Yep.
We had visited here with some friends of ours, and so it's been a great 6.5, 7 years.
That's awesome. So, David, I kind of made mention to it earlier, but you have a unique. I say unique. I guess it's not, because everybody deals with these things, but your specific circumstances are unique to me. But you've got a journey of grief, and not just losing one person in the last few years. And so you have, and that's really what we're going to talk to David about. It's about grief and the journey of grief and the role of grief and how God can use it, but how difficult and how real it is too. So really, David, just tell us about that journey and tell us kind of what has transpired over the last several years.
Well, I've July the 3rd, 2016. I got one of the worst phone calls of my life. I work at Walmart in Gardendale at the time, and I'm getting ready, go to work. Get up. I'm working late hours. I get up and I get a phone call, and it's my mother calling me back. I call her back. I actually talked to a friend of hers, and she says, "Well, your father he's in the hospital. He's basically cardiac arrest."
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I'm new to death. I was new to death at that point, other than grandparents, but I never actually gotten that first call. So we got in the car. We drove to see my dad. My dad was technically already gone. But it was a day like I could remember it. I'll probably remember the rest of my life. Just a day that you'll never forget. I was able to see my father, but he was hooked up to a lot of machines.
Sure.
And I remember my mother saying, "I don't want to remember him like that." And I really don't. I have flashes of it. It's something you don't ever want to see, but he was already gone.
Yeah.
And the doctor came in and told us that we could make the call now, or we could wait 24 to 48 hours to make a final decision.
Yeah.
And my sister is usually the voice of reason. She's 4 years older than me. She's usually the one that makes decisions, executor and all that of the family. And she was on the road because they live in Florida, so she was on the road. So I was the unenviable task of making that call that day. And I remember my aunt looking at me and just stealing her eyes into me, knowing that I had to make that decision. And so I looked at my mother and I told her, I said, Mom, he's fought the good fight. He's, he's been a servant of the Lord for so long.
Yeah.
I said, he's done fighting.
Mm.
I said, he's ready to go. He's ready to go. And so, there was actually a lot of anger because of the way the doctor, had put it, but that's their job. You have to tell us the options and all that. So we decided to take him off of life support, and they said within 30 seconds to a minute, he was gone.
Mm.
So that was the only thing keeping him alive.
Wow.
But that was the one term that I've put, and it still resonates to this day. 9 years later, was I woke up in a alien world after my father died, because my father and we discussed books. We were both huge Atlanta Braves fans. We were both huge Alabama Crimson Tide fans. Everything that you could possibly connect to this world was connected to my father.
Right.
That day changed me a lot.
Yeah.
It probably changed me for good, because there's certain. I think I'm a different. Oh, I'm not. I don't think. I know I'm a different person from that day. Some days, some good things, some bad things.
Sure.
But because of that journey, and it is totally what it is.
Yeah.
It's I've heard a lot of pastors, and even heard my father say things about it's a process, and I'm still dealing with the process 9 years later. Right. But it's almost like if you lose a limb, or if we've probably had we're to the point where we've probably had a few surgeries over the years.
Just a couple. That's right. We're at that age.
A few surgeries over the years where we've had to learn to walk again.
Yep.
We've had to learn to to use our limbs better, to do things. And it's losing my father on that day. It's like losing a part of yourself.
Yep.
And then almost 3 years later, I lost my mother. She was we actually had gone in she had a little spot on her head, and we had gone in for her. It was actually on her birthday she found out that she had cancer. Just one of those things that when you go through grief, when you go through things like that. And I remember her telling me that she never even had an opportunity to grieve my father, because a few years earlier my grandfather passed away, and she didn't have a chance to grieve her father, and then she barely had the chance to grieve her husband.
Yep.
And about this time is where she's probably the 2-year mark where she said, I'm finally getting the opportunity to grieve him and to grieve my own father. And so, really short battle with cancer. She passed away almost 3 years exactly apart, August the 1st of 19.
Yeah.
And I think I understood the journey a little better.
Having just gone through it, right?
Right.
But having understood it, you're still dealing now with compact loss, right? I mean, you're still, honestly, 3 years later, dealing with the loss of your dad, because that was significant loss for you, especially the relationship you had with your dad. And then, boom, happens again.
Right.
And so, man, I feel like that happens to a lot of people. I do feel like when we lose, especially a parent, it's not long after sometimes we lose that second parent. But but it does compound that wound sometimes.
Right.
And that's part of your journey is it's like a double gut punch, right?
Hmm. And one of the things that, and I still feel this sometimes today, and was jealousy.
Mm.
And it may sound kind of sound strange. There was a lot of, you know, anger. It was always anger. There's always, you know, my mother. She felt guilt because there was nothing she could do about my father.
Mm-hmm.
And even though we talked to her, you know, our longtime doctor who said he there was nothing he could have done. But I would see couples, older couples, and be jealous of
Mm.
them, of not being able to see
Yeah.
that, you know, growing old together type thing. And you know, when my father passed away, I really shut everybody out, and you know, I had to repair relationships with my wife,
Mm.
you know, with my sister, with my aunts and uncles, and you know, we all process it differently. And I think through that journey, I think God actually showed me that, you know, with when we were leading up to my mom's death, we knew, you know, it was terminal. It was stage 4 at this point, and there was really no turning back. So we were grieving for like the last 3 or 4 months
Right.
over someone that was still alive.
Yeah.
But I think God just was opening my eyes to how I reacted the first time, and kind of walking me back into people's relationships through
Mm.
this. And it's, you know, it hurt me to remember this the way I felt, um, just, you know, counting back how I reacted to it.
Right.
But you know, our hearts were hardened.
Mm.
You know, there was really no way to, you know, like I said, it's never touched me like that.
Right. Right.
And you know, I was I remember talking to my wife, because she dealt with some people in her family who had cancer, and I remember her telling me that you don't want to be there at the end
Mm.
because of what cancer does to people, and because of the unfortunately, my wife was great during this whole situation, but because of a sickness, she wasn't able to be there at the end, and my sister and I were.
Mm.
And I remember thinking that as the days went by, as my mother got weaker and weaker and lost weight and really forgot who we were,
Right.
um, forgot, you know, what was going on. There was days that she would wake up and then she would realize that what situation she was in. But I'm thankful for those moments. I'm thankful for those last couple of days, couple of weeks, couple of hours.
Yeah.
And no, it probably painful to see it, but I think God said, what you suffered in those 3 years, you're going to get this opportunity
Mm.
to see someone pass over. Because my dad was gone when I saw it.
Right. Right.
I mean, he was gone. I actually saw my mother shed her last tears. I saw her stare into our eyes. She had not been awake for at least another, probably a week. She was on morphine. She stared into our eyes, bluest eyes. You know, my mother had the bluest eyes. She stared into our eyes, never said a word, just assured us that she was where she wanted to be.
And you got to
And
soak all that up.
when that in that last, you know, the nurse called us in on that day, the August 1st, and she said, "Come here, come here." And you know, her breathing was slowing down. And she told us, she said, "You want to be here?" And my mother opened her eyes and looked to the heavens, and tears just rolling down her cheeks. And I told her, I said, of all those days that she's suffering, that we're suffering, losing another parent, that was worth it. Because,
Wow.
and she had actually said that she wanted to go home. She'd wake up, sometimes she would sleep for 2-3 days. She would wake up, she said, and she would cry, and we'd like, "Are you in pain?" She said, "Oh, I just want to go home."
Mm.
And I think because of that, we were, and I actually told my sister, and it really sounds weird. It sounded weird even. I said, I've never prayed for someone to die. And I said, but Mother was she had lost so much weight. She had really forgotten who she was, who we were, just forgotten. But she was like a child. In a lot of ways, it says we should be like children. And in a lot of ways, it was good. But the fact that she fought life so strong at the end,
Yeah.
instead of fighting death,
Right. She was ready.
she was ready to go.
So, um, you mentioned kind of the way you responded the first loss, and then how God used that to teach you.
Right.
And it's kind of what I want to talk about next is you actually did something really healthy. You eventually went to a grief recovery program,
Right.
and you learned really good things through this process. So, what
Right.
are some things that you learned through the grief journey?
Number one, it's there's people out there that have gone through it, and there's people out there that have gone through so much worse. And it is a process, and it's not a, you know, my approach. I'm a very, if y'all don't know me, I'm a very outgoing person. I like to talk. I talk a lot. Sometimes I have to tone it down. I have to be asked to tone it down. Well, my uncle, on my dad's side, he's totally different. I'm like my dad. My uncle Bill is a totally different person. Great person, super smart, but he's quiet. My approach and his approach were not going to be the same.
Right.
And I remember my mother saying, because he was so closed up about it, she said, maybe you need to talk to him about it. I said, Mom, this is his journey.
Right.
This is his process. I said, my process is talking it out. His process may be like just taking it all in.
Yeah.
My aunt and uncle both worked at the state lab in Montgomery. So they have the technical mind, but they also like the medical behind all this stuff. Yeah, the analytical stuff. So when my dad was basically gone, they're talking about, this was how far along he was, congestive heart failure, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know any of that stuff. If it's not on ER or Grey's Anatomy, I don't really know what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, if we're not seeing on TV yet,
I don't know what intubating means. I don't know if it means anything, but they always say that
they always say that.
you need to intubate 20 cc's or something. I don't know. I don't know what that is, but it's anybody that needs that goes through grief, they need support. The worst, I bottled myself up for a good 2.5, 3 years, and I'm an emotional person. I'm a crier. Crying is good.
Yeah.
And my dad was a big man, a boisterous man, but he would cry watching a commercial.
Right.
And I'm the same way. I'll see a commercial and I'm bawling. But crying is a great way to get through it. Mm. And look, I have questioned, I have yelled, I have I've gone out and I'm like, why? I've asked questions. I've been angry. I've been jealous. I've been everything, and it's just the process. Mm-hmm. But it does take. It's definitely going to take more than one person. Like, you're not going to work this way. You're not going to work through grief by yourself. course, if you got God with you anyway,
Right.
God's going to be with you. But the thing is, like you could have a great quarterback, but if you don't have an offensive line, it doesn't matter.
That's right.
And if you don't have people to throw to, or people to, if you don't have a defense, it doesn't do any good.
That's right.
So you have to have a support group.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't for 3 years. I did not have I had the support group here.
Right, but you didn't embrace the support group.
I did
Yeah.
not. Yes. In fact, we talked many times during this situation, and really after, when Mom got sick, and so, it was, there's a right way and a wrong way to do it.
Mm.
I did it both ways. And I'm here still dealing with it, but that's the first thing you got to do. You have to find a support group, and there's grief share groups all over.
Mm.
I'm open to sharing anytime you need anybody that needs me. But it's no, long story short, nobody's journey is the same. Nobody's approach is the same. If you want to bottle it up. That's your prerogative. If you want to rail against the machine, if you want to yell at the heavens, look, Jesus was on the cross, wondering why.
That's right.
Am I doing this?
Yeah.
And so God understands. He understands. We don't see the whole picture. We don't even see an inkling of the picture.
That's right.
So, but the approach is different. The way that we react as people is different.
Right. And we talked before we started recording about this, and so I want you to share a little bit about that. I think that's one of the things you learn too, is not only is our approach different, but going through this, we're different. Right. So, what did you learn about how it changes you?
Yeah, it's I am it's I'm less tolerant sometimes against around things. Um because I've, in fact, my wife is, sometimes, wives are there to point out, I have a beautiful wife. I have a great wife. She's not critical at all. But every now and then you have to be critical. You have to point them in line. So she says, "You're a little meaner than you used to be," and I am.
Mm.
But I also think that it drives part of my anger got me through this. I've if I'm angry and I'm going out starting fights, or drinking alcohol, taking drugs to kill this up, but I'm fighting through it. I'm just fighting through it. It's I know I use a lot of sports analogies, but I'm in the ring fighting. We're in 12 rounds.
Yep.
And
it's a heavyweight battle here.
From 2016 to 2019, I was dead on my feet.
Yeah.
I was getting counted out quick. So,
a friend of mine, author Joel Malm, he talks about anger, and he says, anger is actually a good tool. You got to consult your anger. He says anger always points to a fear of loss of three different things. It's comfort, security, and control. And really, when a death happens, that's what's happening, right? You've lost something, and you've lost comfort, you've lost security in your life because of a loved one, you've lost control. Certainly, we can't control who lives and dies. And that does breed anger, and you have to consult your anger. But that's a natural part of the grieving process.
Mm-hmm.
Anger. Yeah.
But I will say this. I have noticed that just within the last year or two that my sympathetic side has gotten stronger. Because I think in the past, and this may sound callous, but sometimes we, as deaths come around us, not necessarily people that we know, but people we work with and acquaintances, we pass it off as, okay, just moving on. But now I think I'm more sympathetic to just death, people that lose people in general, because I go back to right after my father passed. I went and spoke to a former pastor of ours, and he was on staff with my dad, and went over and talked to him, and left the whole thing feeling worse than when I got there, because all they did was give me, he's in a better place, he's not suffering.
The cliches.
Yes. And that really got me thinking, how many times have we looked at somebody and said, I know how you feel, or they're in a better place? Well, I looked at my mom. I said, I just miss him.
Yeah.
I just miss him. I said, I know. Look, I walked the aisle, as a little kid. I was 4 or 5, 6 years old, walked the aisle. So I know where my salvation lies. And I understand what happens after we die. I know where we're going. But that don't mean I want to wait another 50 years to see my dad.
Right.
And my mom.
That's right. And that to me, that's natural, because death wasn't intended, right? Death is a consequence of sin. God created this world without death.
Yeah.
And so anytime death happens, that's not natural.
Mm-hmm.
We say, well, it's natural. It wasn't natural.
Yeah.
That's not how God intended things. So
right.
that's why it hurts so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I tell people all the time, now I know how you feel. I don't, I can't relate. There's deaths, and I tell people a lot in grief. A good friend of mine lost his nephew about a year ago. He was in his 20s. He'd had cancer, fought cancer for several years. Different circumstances, but it's still death. It's still grief.
Mm-hmm.
So when I speak, if I speak to you about grief, it's not going to be it's not going to be from, I'm an expert
right.
on childhood death, or this death or this death. It's just grief in general.
Yeah.
Grief is grief. You
That's
lose
right.
somebody, you lose somebody.
That's right.
And so I've probably been the one. I've probably said, I know how you feel. Because we've all, we've lost parents and grandparents and all that, but that's the thing that I try to take home the most is, no, I don't want to be that. I don't want to know how that feels.
Right.
Like, I had this discussion just a couple of days ago about I said, I'm not an expert. I'm in here because, I've been touched by grief. I'm not an expert, and I don't want to be an expert.
That's one thing, nobody wants to be an expert.
I don't want to be an expert. I want to have, and I know we'll lose other people. If I'm the next to go, fine. But if we continue to live our years, we're going to lose other people.
Right.
We're going to lose
people that you love. Yeah.
But the thing is, like, I want to be there for people. Yeah. I don't want to be an expert on this.
Right. And that's what God's word says. God says that we suffer certain things in order that we might help those when they suffer.
Right.
Right. And that's a reason, that God allows us to go through these things. So, kind of good natural transition to my last question. So, somebody watching, somebody listening to this, is probably dealing with a loss right now, dealing with some grief, or probably getting ready to, and they don't even know it yet.
Right.
So what's something that you would tell them if you were talking to them face to face?
It's going to be tough. You'll make it through it. But don't give up. My mother said, when you lose somebody, you either go to God or away from God. Well, I went away from God. I ran. But don't go the way I did. And if you do, don't go far. I think we're all part of the we all have a little bit of the wayward son. I think we all run a little bit, but I ran, and But the great thing about running is God never runs. He's running right beside you.
That's right.
I go back to one of the most famous poems or things we've ever seen. Have you ever been in a church in the 80s or anywhere like Christian Life Story? Anywhere you saw footprints.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. Yep, that's
you
right.
saw footprints where it talks about there's only one set. There's two sets, and then when you get on down, there's only one set left.
During the hardest times, yeah.
During the hardest times, and that's when Jesus carried us.
Mm-hmm.
Let me tell you, I'm not here. Not here. We may not even be in Fultondale if God doesn't carry me right now. So, but if anybody's out there listening, I may talk your head off, but I'm gonna help you as good as I can. But you can make it through it. The life is not over. Just because a life is over, your life's not over. And it's possible. Just do it. You need support. Don't try to battle it by yourself.
Don't isolate, right?
Right. Because isolation will make it worse. Yeah. And find a support group. Grief share. Look me up.
If it's okay,
I
was going to ask you, I'll put your contact info in the show notes if that's okay.
Yes, that is totally fine. You can call me. If you want to reach out to me, text me, let me know. I actually live a block from the church. So I can be at the church parking lot. I can be anywhere.
It's walking distance. At least it was before your knee surgery. So
it's walking distance with hiking gear. Yes, our roads around here are a little steep.
Well, David, thank you so much for just sitting down and sharing your story and how God has used it and how God has taught you and grown you through this journey. So I appreciate it. And this one's a little heavy, right? This topic's a little heavy, but I know that it's also been encouraging to you because we all face this. It's universal. So thank you again for being here, and thank you guys for watching and listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss a single episode. Help us spread the word about the podcast by sharing on socials too. Thanks again, and we'll see you next episode.